Itu udah kamera, baterai, tripod semua dibawa semua?
Aman semua sih,
aman semua ya?
udah aman semua, udah.
Jadi kita ini kan masuk markas kepolisian nih, Polda Metro Jaya. Di situ ada Ali Imran, pelaku bom Bali 1.
The Bali bombings were orchestrated by a group of about 30 people, but led by an inner sanctum of about 6 bombers. One of the most important of these was Ali Imran. He assisted to assemble the bomb and also organisation and procuring the materials required to build the bombs.
Ngobrol biasa dulu ya. Saya sebagai koordinator lapangan pengeboman di Bali. Jadi saya antarkan dari tempat peracikan dan perakitan kami hingga di Jalan Legian. Diskotik di Jalan Legian yang paling banyak atau yang paling rame bulenya. Maka waktu itu saya dapatkan Sari Club sama Pedis Pub. Jadi dalam bom Bali 12 Oktober tahun 2002, kami rencanakan satu bom mobil yang bobotnya sekitar 1 ton. 2 bom rompi yang bobotnya sekitar 10 kg. Jadi begini, sebetulnya kalau saya sampaikan dalam kesempatan ini, perencanaan, persiapan banyak amburadulnya. Yang disampaikan pada perencanaan itu katanya orang-orang yang siap bom bunuh diri ini adalah semuanya sudah siap. Tetapi ternyata orang-orang ini belum siap 100%. Setelah arnasan yang akan bunuh diri di mobil, sudah saya ajari caranya meledakkan, saya lihat dia agak sedih. Kalau tidak siap, nanti akan kami ledakkan dengan remote. Nah pada waktu itu dia menjawab, enggak Pak, saya sedih karena kenapa saya belum lancar nyetirnya.
I'm Kumar Ramakrishna. I've been a counterterrorism specialist for 20 years. The 2 suicide bombers who were from the rural countryside of Java, they didn't know how to drive. Essentially, Ali Imran had to be the one to drive them to a site near Sarikla and Pedis Bar, and then he got out.
Once the van had been swapped over to the driver, Ali Imran escaped the scene as a pillion passenger on a motorbike they just purchased days previously.
Then one of the suicide bombers drove in a straight line. I mean, that's all he could do. He stopped the white van in front of the Sari Club. The other suicide bomber got out, walked into the Paddy's bar that was diagonally opposite the Sari Club. And he detonated his suicide bomb.
Paddy's blast had actually sort of dual effect in that it killed people in the immediate vicinity and it also caused people to come out of Paddy's bar into the already crowded street. It also had the effect of attracting the attention and curiosity of people who had been at the back of the Sari Club to come forward to the front of the club and out on the street.
This is the point at which the second suicide bomber, still in the van in front of the Sari Club, he detonated the bigger bomb.
Guys, this is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. It's huge, it's scary. People are burnt everywhere. There's people dead. I just don't believe what happened here tonight.
My name is Roberto Maldonado. I'm a Brazilian photographer. That night, I was photographing the opening shop of a friend of mine, very close to the Sari Club.
I'm Hermawan Julistio. I was teaching at the Indonesian National Police College. I was there in Bali as team leader doing research on the capacity of the police. I was 300 meters away and we are having late dinner.
I am Teolina Marapaung. That night, I am with two friends in a car. One of my friends, he would like to see Kuta area in that night. So he driving and then we passed Kuta Beach and come to Legian Street. So many cafe and restaurant and pubs. It's very live when the Saturday night happened.
My name is Eric DeHart. I was one of the founders of the Coogee Dolphins Rugby League Football Club based in Sydney, Australia. I got pretty sick 2 years prior to Bali, and the guy said that I worked too hard and I've got to learn to relax and I've got to go on their end of season football trip, which was to Bali. So we ended up only taking 11 guys to Bali.
That night, the traffic in Legian Street is very full. Our car ran very slow and stopped.
11 of us that went to the Sari Club. We went there, we just sort of grabbed a table at the front. That drink is called a Suffering Bastard. It's a drink that was almost exclusive to the Sari Club. What happened was, out of the corner of my eye, I caught one of my mates staggering out of the Sari Club, and I said to him, "Ellie, what's wrong?" He goes, "Oh, mate, I've had too much to drink." So I said, "Well, you're heading the wrong way. Come on, I'll take you back to our hotel." So I took him back to the hotel and made sure he got in okay, and so I was on my way back to the Sari Club.
When I heard the first bomb was the baddest one, I didn't know it was a bomb at all. I thought it was a gas explosion. So I had my camera in my hand. I knew that I had to document it. Then I started to run towards it.
There, the right hand, that Sari Club, my car is 8 cars from that, and suddenly the biggest sound is coming.
And as soon as I left the shop, the second one happened, the big one.
All of a sudden, a really, really dull thud. The ground kind of shook, and there was a big orange light in the sky, and big mushroomy type shape.
Oh my gosh, it's a bomb. The police at first suspected that this was only electricity outage. But seeing from the flames, I said, no, this must be a bomb. I ran to the scene. It's like a hell. I saw somebody inside the car with no head, and I stepped on somebody with no hand.
both friend is lying in the car. I'm lying also, same like them. And then I trying to open the window and feeling in my hand so many glass. When I touch my face, both eyes also feel like water, but it's all of the blood. So many plenty in my face and my eyes. That's the glass.
Let me show you some of the picture I took. Then you guys can see what really happened. It's just fire all around. It was very hot. I tried to even get closer to help someone, but it's really, really hot. I could see this girl, she was coming out from the back beside a sari club. Some people came with almost no clothes. The blast ripped their clothes off and their shoes too.
I live in Bali around 30 years. I'm the local cameraman who covered the Bali bombing in 2002. I have around 100 tapes. I saved these tapes since 2002 until now. When I come to the location, I'm very scared because never happened in Bali like this. This is the fetish pub when got fire, many big flames, and many people trapped inside. And this is the Sari Club. Many people also trapped in Sari Club.
This picture became very famous, iconic. Time magazine published it twice. It got cover of Paris Match and other magazines. I remember this girl, she managed to get out. She went back to look for her fiancé, and then she got this guy. The guy didn't make it. He passed away from the injuries.
I've got to find out what's happening to the boys. As the oldest member on the trip, I kind of felt responsibility for them. I went looking for the boys in the Sari Club. I was trying to keep an eye open for anyone, any voices, so I could hear the boys are okay. I heard some girls crying out. They had been trapped when the roof had fallen. I knew that being a bigger guy, I couldn't get through it without getting hurt myself and dying in that act. I had to turn my back on those girls and walk away from it, and I've questioned myself ever since if I did the right thing.
The final death toll was 202 people killed. There are a high proportion of Indonesians. There are also victims from the United States, from the UK, Europe, Japan, all over the region. But the vast majority, 88 victims, were Australian.
I'm John Howard. I was Prime Minister of Australia when the terrible attacks in Bali took place.
The Sari Club bomb is compared to lighting of a giant matchstick. It was extremely obvious that there was a stockpile of flammable material. The Sari Club was comprised of a grass-thatched roof. There was also bottles of alcohol. It was a club. Gas cylinders for cooking. I was one of the first Australian police officers to arrive at the scene of the Bali bombing minutes after the explosion. These are photos that I took the morning after the blast, which demonstrates the ferocity of what occurred the night before. This photo is actually of the Sari Club, where you can see the extent of the damage.
This is a model of the Sari Club. It had a thatched roof that, as you know, burst into flames.
So as you can see, within the Sari Club, the front was open, but the back had 3 concrete walls. When the explosion occurred in the road, the fireball went into Sari Club and closed by the 3 walls, reflected out, and unfortunately across the road there was an uncompleted bank structure with an open front, but the back was already up. The fireball went into the club, reflected out to the bank and into the club again. So there was an echo effect and destroyed structures down the road as well.
You can just imagine from a forensics point of view the difficulty of trying to go through all of this rubble and to trying to find the single clue that will hopefully give you a breakthrough in your pursuit of those responsible. There was damage for hundreds of metres away from the Sari Club, so crime scene management was going to be extraordinarily difficult.
I could see that the whole area was not secured, and seeing people traversing across the whole area of devastation, which is an official crime scene, was very disturbing to me. I was very frustrated.
Well, if a crime scene isn't sealed off properly, there's potential for the crime scene to become contaminated. The contamination itself can serve to throw up false leads.
Suspecting that there were going to be a lot of Australian casualties, I had to act upon the interests of Australia. Being the first Australian police officer on the scene, it was my duty to engage my counterparts around securing the crime scene. I went straight to the office of the Chief of Police of the Bali province. It was a very difficult discussion to have with my counterpart. There was a lot of frustration in the room. There was not a lot of understanding.
The police was poor at that time. We don't have police line long enough to do radius of the bombing. Money, it's a real matter. They didn't have money even to buy gas for motorcycle. I told them, use whatever you find, including chairs.
There were also cultural and religious factors that may have led to local people wanting to try to clean up the crime scene, if you like, or to try to restore things back to some sort of sense of normality.
Local custom, culture, tradition was that ghosts and spirits would inhabit an area where death had occurred. And as a result, the local people wanted to clear the site as quickly as possible. This was one of the biggest blast site crime scenes in recent history. There's only one opportunity to gather evidence. A lot of negotiation had to occur with the local community. So ultimately, an agreement was struck. We could examine the site for 3 weeks and then they would want the site cleaned up.
Are we ready? I'm John Howard. I was Prime Minister of Australia when the terrible attacks in Bali took place. Bali was called Australia's 9/11 by some people because of the scale of the death toll. It was the biggest ever loss of life in a non-military event. It was an extraordinary occurrence. And on top of that, what likened it to 9/11 was there was no warning, there was no justification. It was just a random, wanton act of terrorism.
I know that I speak for all Australians in expressing a sense of outrage, sadness and horror at what has occurred overnight in Bali.
The attack had occurred on Indonesian soil. Unless we respected and worked closely with the Indonesians, we weren't going to track down those responsible.
We are assisting the Indonesian National Police.
So this was a clip of me some 20 years ago, so a younger version obviously.
This investigation is being conducted by the Indonesian authorities. They have asked for assistance of the Australian Federal Police. We are providing that assistance.
In this particular conference, I was being asked questions about the AFP involvement in this investigation, and the Australian Federal Police had no executive power of arrest in that foreign jurisdiction. The Australian Federal Police was responding to requests for assistance.
The Australian Federal Police and the Indonesian National Police have worked very hard to build a relationship in the years preceding the Bali bombing over issues such as drug trafficking, people smuggling. But the scale of the investigation was unprecedented. We'd never done anything like this before. And at one stage there were 200 or 300 Australian Federal Police officers in Indonesia. This was the largest investigation in the Australian Federal Police's history.
Kepolisian Indonesia meminta bantuan AFP karena Indonesia memang masih terbatas kemampuannya, baik di bidang teknologi maupun di bidang investigasi tentang bom.
You must know that the Indonesian police force was previously under the armed forces.
So historically, under the Suharto regime, Indonesian National Police was actually a part of the Indonesian military apparatus.
And a decision was made after the conclusion of the Suharto regime that the police should be a separate entity.
So when the Bali blast took place, the police was really a new institution and they don't have capable to handle such situations.
The suspicion has been reported fairly widely that a former Indonesian Air Force officer is involved, or is that not right? There's been a lot of confusion.
There were a series of theories that started to emerge in the press. Some of these were quite simply bizarre. One was missiles launched by a US submarine off the coast of Kuta, striking the Sari Club.
In Jakarta, one of the head of the intelligence office says this is micronuclear, that only Israel can make it. I was so angry because if it was a micro nuke, then I was the first person who died of the radiations.
There were quite a number of relatively bizarre conspiracy theories, but a couple of the more sensible ones were the one view that perhaps the Bali bombing was done by an Al-Qaeda cell. Al-Qaeda had, after all, the year before perpetrated September 11th. Another theory was perhaps this could even have been the work of a homegrown cell, Indonesians that had been radicalized.
The Indonesian authorities were a little reluctant to identify a homegrown group as being responsible for such a global terror incident. There hadn't been a long history of terrorist groups within Indonesia.
Before Bali bombings, terrorism was not in people's mind in Indonesia because this man, Suharto, ruled Indonesia for 3 decades. He was a dictator. He applied zero tolerance to extremism and radicalism. That's why the extremist clerics, let's say Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, remain exiled in Malaysia.
Abu Bakar Bashir had created Jemaah Islamiyah JI, a transnational network, but born and based in Indonesia. Jemaah Islamiyah JI had always wanted to create a pan-Southeast Asian Islamic caliphate, covering, of course, Indonesia, southern Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, and even Australia as well. They wanted to essentially overthrow all these secular governments by force and set up the caliphate which they had in mind.
In 1997, there was an Asian financial crisis. In Indonesia, people at that time were very angry because of the increase of price and everything. And then with the fall of Suharto regime, Abu Bakar Ba'asyir returned back to Indonesia. He became a charismatic leader for the lost soul, lost mind. At that time, after 1997, we had what I call as leadership crisis. So Ba'asyir didn't get attention from the government. In 4 years, we had 4 different presidents, and the last was Megawati. The momentum was right at that time that Abu Bakar Ba'asyir selling the idea to build an Islamic state and against the government.
President Megawati had a vice president who represented the Islamist constituency, and this was Mr. Hamzah Has. Several months before the Bali attacks, Vice President Hamzah Has had a meeting with some of the leading Indonesian Islamist extremists in the country. One of the extremists was Abu Bakar Bashir. After he met them, Vice President Hamzah, he essentially said that there's no extremism in Indonesia. All these people just want to promote Islam in society.
Hey, is it okay if I film out here? You can't actually film outside of the building, secret location. Hey, Andrew, I'm from CNA. Hey, is it okay if I film out here? You can't actually film outside of the building, secret location, but we can go inside and you can film in there. We're in the storage facility of the AFP, so this holds a lot of evidence, objects from past crimes. We're going to get some items that are related to the Bali bombing and forensic investigation.
Well, in a crime scene examination, it's important to be able to identify those seemingly innocuous items which later on in the investigation may prove vital. So some of the items that were collected at the time included things like china from the Sari Club, drinks tickets, a street sign, because you just don't know the extent to which these items may ultimately reveal themselves as having some evidentiary value.
So this item here is a piece of copper wire, and basically David Royds discovered this at the Bali bombing site within Paddy's.
You all right, Andrew?
Hey David. How are you going?
Very well indeed. The piece of copper wire that I found in Paddy's bar. It's got black insulation on it,
and you can see heat damage to the insulation. The first time I entered Paddy's Bar was with a reluctant agreement of some guards outside. We're guests in another jurisdiction. There was a general perception portrayed in the Australian media that the relationship between the Australian police and the Indonesian police is a very close, warm, friendly relationship. Now that may have been the case at the highest levels, but it certainly wasn't on the ground. On the ground there was bewilderment as to why were Australians in an Indonesian crime scene. What right do they have to be here? So there was friction at the outset.
We have a high distrust to Australian police. We said they will manipulate our hard evidence, so don't share it with them. But some group inside the Indonesian police have higher trust to the AFB, so they said, let them do the work. Let them help us. The first time I entered Paddy's Bar, I was seeing things that I just could not leave behind. So I immediately picked up what I recognised to be leg wires of a detonator. All copper wires used in electronics is multi-stranded, but on detonators, the leg wires, just a single core covered with insulation. So I immediately put them in this little plastic cup. I was just pretending I was drinking water as I was walking around. Then eventually the copper wire, I folded it into a paper envelope and placed it in the top pocket of my overalls. And then I forgot about them. It's not a good story, I don't particularly like telling it, Alistair. After a very, very, very long day, I just felt as though my overalls was just in such a putrid state from being in this scene for so long. I just had to wash them. I poured water into the sink and just gave them a good rinsing. And then next morning, I suddenly remembered that there was a paper envelope in the top pocket that contained these copper wires. I immediately pulled it apart and carefully unfolded it, went off, tested the copper wire and got a positive result for TNT. I could still find the TNT because TNT by its very nature is insoluble in water. It's like beeswax and residues will survive being underwater for quite some time. In fact, up to weeks actually.
It was determined that TNT had been the primary explosive used at Paddy's Bar. It is quite a common explosive. But that identification of itself did identify who was responsible, and there was obviously a lot more work to be done.
The Sari Club was a massive big explosion. And what you can see is a large pool of water here. This is the area where the car bomb blew up. When it blew up, it burst the water mains.
The burst water main made it very difficult to examine evidence or may have washed evidence away. Similarly, the fire brigade response and the amount of water that they had utilised makes the hunt for evidence all the more difficult. Everyone happened to be looking down because that's where the evidence tended to be, on the ground. And in this case, it was a simple thing when somebody decided, let's look up.
And what you can see is 2 power poles directly beside the crater. We analysed swabs taken about 2 metres above the ground on both those poles.
And lo and behold, that's where the evidence was, potassium chlorate high up on light poles. Potassium chlorate, which is a chemical found in bleachers and matchsticks.
Potassium chlorate can be used as a weed killer or herbicide. It can be used in explosive manufacture.
There was a sense of elation when potassium chlorate was discovered, because then that would enable us to be able to look for distributors or sellers. Where could these people have actually sourced that potassium chlorate from? The search led investigators some distance away where potassium chlorate was available. However, unfortunately, that didn't yield the fruit that we had hoped. The person who sold the chemicals to the bombers was not identified. At that point in the chain, the lead went cold.
Second question here at the front.
Was the bomb was set off by remote control, or was there a suicide bomber who was killed inside?
We have not come to that conclusion yet.
Okay. Masyarakat termasuk petugas tidak percaya adanya pelaku bom bunuh diri. Mereka tidak percaya kalau orang Indonesia mau melakukan hal itu. Dan pada dasarnya masyarakat yang dipercayai adalah bom bunuh diri adalah hal yang dilarang oleh agama.
The original theory was that a bomb had been thrown through an open window and had rolled across the floor in Paddy's Bar. We knew that TNT was the explosive in Paddy's Bar. Paddy's Bar had a concrete floor. If TNT had been on the floor, it would have left a shattered crater there of sand. It weighed on my mind that there was no crater. This is an image of the ceiling in Paddy's Bar. There was a complete story being told up there, captured in blood spatter and soot residues that just needed to be interpreted. This is an image of me standing on top of a solid timber table, taking scrapings of the spatter marks on the ceiling. I was very interested to know whether the DNA on the ceiling was from more than one person. It turned out it came from one person only. But the most plausible explanation was that it was a suicide bombing. This is an image of me pointing at the spatter marks on the ceiling. But what I'm pointing at is the condition of the floor, showing that there's no damage to that floor at all. And that was very strong evidence to indicate that the bomb had been suspended some 1.2 metres above the floor when it exploded. It became apparent to me that it was a suicide bombing event. However, there was no indication of what the motivation was. In fact, nobody took credit for the bombing. You need to know who your offenders are, and working out who did it is challenging.
We're also conscious that in many terrorist attacks, the perpetrators were never identified. But sometimes it's just about making sure that if there is a break, you're there, ready to take full advantage of it.
The most extraordinary piece of detective work that I can remember.
Here is an interesting article in that it was published on the Wednesday the 23rd of October 2002, 11 days after the bombing. It references Indonesia's Police Chief General Dibaktia confirming for the first time that police were now trying to establish links between the bombings and the involvement of the group known as Jemaah Islamiyah. And it's important because, according to the article at least, it states that until now Indonesian police had been careful to say that JI was not suspected of the Bali bombings.
Betul, jadi tekanan itu dari berbagai pihak, termasuk para politisi, karena mereka memprotes. Nama Jemaah Islamiyah berarti seluruh umat muslim itu Jemaah Islamiyah. Publik dianggap itu merusak nama agama.
Within Indonesia, there was an ambivalent stance because Jemaah Islamiyah basically means Islamic community. That is very innocuous. What does this mean? Does this GI even exist?
Hi, and welcome to Maptech. Come on through. So Maptech is a company that provides technology and solutions to the mining industry. An example up here. We've been manufacturing laser scanners for over 20 years now. An example here. I went across to Bali, spent about 2 to 3 days surveying the scene.
You know, no suspect had been arrested. We had to look at everything possible that may yield clues. And so that led us to utilising things like 3D mapping technology to assist. That was the first time that the Australian Federal Police had actually utilised that particular technology.
Unlike a 2D photograph, 3D laser scan data is three-dimensional. As you can see here, when we captured this Bali scene nearly 2 decades ago. With more traditional methods using a measuring tape, it would be extremely difficult because obviously with this type of scene, very time consuming. The 3D data captures the entire scene. You can come back later and actually look at details that you didn't think you really wanted at the time. So if I go here, if I spin that around, maybe I could say that there's a vehicle, you can see the lights, you can see where the number plate is, for example. And here is the front or the entrance to the Sari Club. And this was the resultant crater once that van was detonated. The red indicates the depth of the crater. That depth is very indicative of explosive power. Here is an example where I believe there was some form of structure from the van that was found visually embedded in one of the buildings. From the 3D data, we're actually able to calculate the distance from the crater that that object is.
So we used the 3D mapping to trace the wider crime scenes. For instance, an engine block was found 49 metres from the blast site. The engine block was certainly part of the van. We did a thorough examination of the engine block and unfortunately there were no unique identifiers found on it. We were looking for engines, chassis, anything that might give us the crucial lead that we required.
Is it possible that they'll get it or any kind of identification number off the car that was outside the Sari Club?
Well, obviously that's one of the things I'll be looking for. Such as chassis numbers to trace back the history of vehicles.
Chassis, critical, absolutely critical. Frustrating, but ultimately critical to this investigation.
The chassis, it says it all. It's the beginning, it's the end. That was the huge breakthrough everyone was waiting for.
Ketika kita semua bingung siapa pelakunya, kita harus mulai dari tempat kejadian perkara. Disitulah ditemukan rangka sasis mobil dan disitulah mulai diperiksa.
So once the chassis had been located, we looked for the vehicle identification numbers.
The chassis number certainly didn't come easy. The chassis was, as you can imagine, after a bomb of that size, a mangled wreck of twisted steel.
A piece of the chassis was found on the roof of a bank across the road from the Sari Club.
But the bombers had taken the precaution of chiselling off the chassis number.
Ternyata sudah dihapus.
Again, we were left at a point whereby where to next in terms of the search for clues.
Kemudian pada saat itulah ketua tim investigasi bersembahyang. Pada saat beliau bersembahyang, kemudian mendapat telepon. Pada saat itulah telepon yang ternyata dari anak buahnya menginformasikan bahwa dari tim di lapangan telah menemukan nomor kasus dari mobil yang...
The bombers had taken off the chassis number. but a dedicated forensic officer didn't give up.
Was the most extraordinary piece of detective work that I can remember. A forensic examiner from Indonesia by the name of Rudy found a number that was hidden.
So ultimately, that piece of chassis had a metal strut welded across, presumably to reinforce that part of the chassis by a former owner of the vehicle. That bar had been welded on so that it actually covered up this number.
Just for the cars in Bali, they put another number. So when Ali Imran and his gang erased the number, they didn't know that there's another number.
When that strut had been removed, it revealed this identification number in a pristine condition, which then allowed us to be able to trace that vehicle. And so that was an enormous and pivotal breakthrough. That vehicle identification number very quickly led to the Bali bombers. Ali Imran confirmed that Jemaah Islamiyah was behind the Bali bombings.
There was no point in denying that JI existed or that JI was not responsible for this atrocity.
Abu Bakr Bashir, co-founder of Jemaah Islamiyah JI, his role was essentially to create a climate within which such attacks could occur.
Langsung ke kamera.
I would say the beginning of the road to Bali, the thwarted Singapore plot in December 2001.
That was the genesis of the Bali bombings.